This is a lithium ion battery. Now, I think we're familiar with these. I mean, for the past couple of decades, these have been in and around a lot of things we use. These were around a lot of toys that I used to play with growing up. And so it's great to see the scale of these improve to the fact where this can power a car and this can power a house. And the article I came across the other day off of CNET, I'm going to pull it up here, was how a home battery can help save on energy bills. And I thought that was a fascinating topic because a lot of times we're talking about pairing batteries and solar, which is just such a natural pairing. But if you just isolate it and look at what the benefits are for lithium ion battery storage and the potential that it has to just give us a little bit more control over how we use our power and when, it really makes a lot of sense. So I just want to skim through this article and maybe interject it with a few things from our experience and how our house is run off grid here, because we are on battery power. We are just like in this article here. Let's go scroll down. You got the Tesla Powerwall sitting in the middle there, right next to those tall white cabinets. So we have three of those power walls. Our setup looks like this. So we have three of those power walls. They're all kind of stacked up in that corner. And the gateway, I'm sort of facing towards the gateway, that Tesla gateway that dictates how the power is used, how it comes in from the solar, how it gets inverted from DC power to AC house power. But for all intents and purposes, we're talking about this battery. It's bigger versions of this battery, packed more densely. I think the chemistry has been advanced enough so that there's just more opportunity to access larger amounts of power over the years. And so now in our home batteries, we have this arrangement where we could store power. And what does that mean? I mean, for us, it means when the sun is shining, it's pretty easy equation. It means when the sun is shining, we're able to store power. And so, for instance, this morning, sun was not shining, pretty overcast. We weren't making too much power. We typically drop about, we typically drop about 25 to 30%, maybe about a power wall overnight. So here we are in the morning, we're at 73%, and we're not bringing anything in. And it was a little cool out. And I actually wanted to show this particular video where our house is running, just to give you an idea of what a mini split versus a larger vented ducted. It's still a really efficient system. We're still talking about a heat pump based system, but it's our larger house system where you can see it's pulling 4.5 kilowatts. So it's pulling 4.5 kilowatts. And if we go back to the article here, that looks like a single power wall. So let's just take a single power wall right now in isolation and trying to run 4.5 kilowatts of heat. So if a single power wall gives you about 12 or 13 usable kilowatts of power, let's call it 12 kilowatts of power. And let's say the startup power on our mini split or on our heat pump, on our ducted first floor, everything's ducted. So it's just a larger system. And the main unit is actually, we have a crawl space is there. And then the compressor is outside. And so if it's 4 hours, if it's 4 kilowatts an hour, and we've got 12 kilowatts in a single battery, it gives us 3 hours of heat for all intents and purposes. Now, the power draw changes. So it's 4.5 to start up and to start to get it up to a temperature. But once it gets more neutralized, once it kind of, it's not doing as much work. The heating element is heated up. The blower is kind of getting the air out there. It's going to use more in the 1 to 2 kilowatt range, to just sustain that. But even still, so we're looking at the article here with that looks like a single power wall. So 12 kilowatts. Even if it took 2 kilowatts to run this, 6 hours. 1 kilowatt, 12 hours. So it's not going to take less than that. So you're looking at not even a 12-hour period worth of heat for a power wall. And that's where it starts to get, this is the time of year, this is why it's a great time to start having these conversations, where it starts to get interesting. And you got to be a little bit creative about how the power gets used. But for all intents and purposes, and in this article, I think if we're just going through it and they're saying, okay, how do we how do you save on your energy bills, which is such a valid question. And for 99% of the population that's plugged into the grid, I mean, the first key step is like, how do we save? How do we use this? We want to be good to the environment, but we want it to be economical, affordable, and efficient for us and make sense for our house. And so that's where it's like, okay, you're still grid tied and you're not relying on being on this battery for heating power. Right? Let's say your grid goes out and you need to supplement a little bit of power for a little bit of time. You could definitely do that. But what a single battery is really good for is really saying, like they're saying, at an off-peak hour, if we're going to use some power and we're going to collect it, why wouldn't we collect it off peak so that we're not paying as much for it? And then maybe we're using it for those couple of hours. That's where the heat comes on, the AC comes on, whatever it is, equipment that uses compressors, that using heating elements, that uses pumps. Those are the ones that tend to run a little bit more power, that are a little bit more power intrusive. And so that's the time when you're really going to need it for those couple of hours. And so having a single battery that you could charge in the middle of the night when the energy prices are, a fraction of what they would be in the peak hours. And I think that's really helpful and beneficial. So that's kind of what the first part of the article touches on here. And then it goes on to basically say, that's the, cheating the time of use rate. So it's like when you're using your power, even if it's more expensive coming through the grid, you're not using that grid energy. Pairing it with solar panels, that's certainly what we do. So we can advocate for that. We've got our solar panels are on that shed, sort of in the background, and getting 36 panels, about 200 watts on that. We've got enough wattage and power draw for our house. It really does come down to battery power, and it comes down to redundancy. And I think a lot of times living off grid, but even being on the grid, having that redundancy on the grid is really important. It's critical, frankly. And it'll allow us to get through a lot of challenging climate situations, but it'll also allow us to just share and democratize power in a way that I feel like we're producing and consuming in a much more connected sense. We're much more grounded to how our power flows, what we're using and why. I mean, that's the thing when you look at this power usage here and you look at 4.5, 4.6 kilowatts, and that's a ton of power, but that's not what it always is. And so what is that extended out? What's that power draw? What's that power usage extended out? What's the minimum we could use? We could get down to a bare minimum here and we can run our house off of 0.2 kilowatts. It's basically what our fridge will run at. Our fridge and the blower fan on our fireplace and the lights, if we keep all those on, we run it between 0.2 and 0.4 kilowatts. And we could really extend the life out of one of those single power walls. So it means that if you have a single power wall and you're grid connected and your grid goes out in a storm, a hurricane, winds, hail, whatever it might be, even heat, where some of the power plants can't meet, those peaker plants don't meet the demand. And that's, I think, what Texas and some of California has been dealing with the past few years. And has done a really resilient job about bringing solar. It's a whole nother conversation, is about how Texas is now becoming grid connected and is now one of, if not the leading solar producer in the country. And it goes to show you, it just makes sense. It makes sense to do it. And we have the opportunity to collect so much sunlight now. And how do we store it? And how do we maintain and manage that storage and that flow of energy so that it makes sense in how we're developing this infrastructure? And so, for instance, we'll go off grid. So go back to the article here. We'll go off grid and we know we've got a finite amount of time. We know that when we're not producing power, solar power, we have a finite amount of time. And yesterday, when we were looking at Rawow's video about the hurricane and hitting Florida, and he basically said, look, tomorrow it's going to be sunny. And I think, I've never lived in Florida. I presume that's pretty accurate. But at the end of the day, here in the Northeast in New England, when we get a nor'easter, a blizzard, some heavier weather formulation moving in, it could stick around for a week. And we could have gray skies and inches of snow and inches of snow and inches of snow, or feet of snow easily accumulating within the course of a few days or a week. And so then what do we do? Because one power wall is not going to be enough. And if you're grid tied, you do have the benefit again of still collecting the power when you need it, using it when you need it. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And so that's kind of what this article goes on to say is if you pair it with solar, you give it that extra boost. And if you join a virtual power plant, a VPP, as they initialed it out, it's another way that you can use your battery effectively, whether it's one battery or several batteries kind of installed in tandem together. And so VPP is basically like a program, I believe. I don't have a lot of insight into this, again, because we don't have a utility, but it's a program run by the utility, National Grid or whoever it might be, that will say anybody with a battery, if you come online to our system, then when we're at a power shortage, when we're at a deficit, when people need power, we're going to be able to tap into your system and use that power when we're not meeting demand. And so I have some thoughts on this. I think it's good. I think it's headed in the right direction. I think this thought about power flowing both ways, that's really the conversation we want to have. And we need the utilities. We need the infrastructure. It's certainly not built for that right now, but the conversation really should evolve naturally, organically, and together. From the top of the pyramid of the utilities that are kind of have had this traditional sense of control over power flow, to the more of a democratization of the bottom of that, where people are now producing their own power and sending it back up. So it just makes sense. It's incumbent upon us to have informed conversations on developing what is going to end up being trillions of dollars worth of infrastructure to handle how all of this energy, this new energy, is going to flow. And this clean energy can flow through to help us all out individually, collectively, and all of this progress that we're making, I think, is headed toward this collective way of looking at energy that we haven't quite, we haven't looked at yet. I certainly didn't before we moved into this house. Didn't know how much power my toaster used. I didn't know how much power my refrigerator used. Didn't know how much power my heat used. You could go on the line. I don't know how much power it took to take a shower. And now just having that sense of it, and I'm not saying we all need to be hyper tuned in and hyper aware, but it does give you a sense of we have great swings of control and leverage that we're able to maintain by just being cognizant of the fact that we're using power and it's a certain amount. Like it adds up. It's an equation that we can calculate and we can formulate and we can offset. And that's what's super exciting. And so those virtual power plants kind of help us collectively offset, any challenges that we might face, from a grid standpoint, because we've got this community that can come together in a very micro sense. That's very much like the neighborhood stoop of electricity. It's like sitting out there and like talking to your neighbors and knowing that you're there for them and they're there for you. And I know that's that's a very kind of utopian way of looking at it, but to a certain degree, being able to collect the sunlight, free energy, available energy, and independently harvest that, I mean, that's a pretty significant step forward in terms of how we approach our power usage and our energy usage, in this country and globally. There's so many things to be learned collectively between us all, and sharing that knowledge, sharing that information, sharing that power is really going to raise that tide for us. It's like the rising tide raises all boats. And we really want to give everybody an opportunity in the ways that they can to be a part of this conversation. And so that starts with a battery. It starts with a battery and collecting solar and some basic things that you could do. You can still have backup power. That's basically the gist of the article. I just thought it was nice to see kind of stripped away from being part of this comprehensive system, stripped away from it being, part of some, this kind of technology based, computer system that interfaces with our house and gives us some control over what to do. It just on the just pure sense of having a battery, having a solar panel, having one of these things is going to start to advance the conversation in a way that's really healthy. That's really healthy and really important. And so the other thing for us, I'm not going to get into it now, but we also last year rewired our manual transfer switch so that we can hook we bought a used electric vehicle, Hyundai, and it has vehicle to load. and we could pull power. Here's the adapter that we kind of plugged into. Sorry for the bad video on this. It was less than ideal conditions. And so we have an adapter here that we could plug into. And I'll skip ahead here. And then we have on our panel, our electrical panel, we have a transfer switch, and it's a manual interlock switch. And so we're able to flip that over and power the house. You could see the lights are on in the background through the car. So we're in vehicle to load right now. This was a couple of months ago. We're going to be coming up again on this. These are the conditions. You could set the minimum charge so you don't pull out all the power from the car if you don't need to. But here, it's just a great example of I'm sure there's a shot of the house. Oh yeah, there we go. That's our car powering our house. And so this is all part of the redundancy. This is why it's important to have a few different ways to produce power, a few different ways to store power, if possible. And the conversation is now to start having this because it's efficient, it's effective, it's essentially there for us to use. So we might as well take advantage of it. And then it's how do we, if we're individually able to collect this power, how does that conversation advance towards our communities? And how do we take that power and do the most good with it, both within our families, within our lifestyles, and then collectively within our world? And so I think that's the great question to ask. And that's going to wrap it up for today. And if you want to see some video of a really guilty looking dog that tore up a toy he probably shouldn't have tore up, that's Huckleberry. And he didn't mean to. He really didn't mean to. So, Mom, if you're watching this, I'm really sorry. And other than that, I hope everybody's got enough power for their day out there. It's brightened up here. So the blue skies have turned a little bit, the gray skies have turned a little bit blue. We're going to be making some power. And I'm going to come back tomorrow, share some more things, some more thoughts, ideas. And I really appreciate everybody if you ever tune in on this. So I said, have enough power for your day inside and out. Catch you later.